Right, the Rebbe is saying we have a sign that the Mashiach is already here. We have a sign, clear sign that the Mashiach is here, and that this is the first generation of the redemption. What's the sign? France. France, in Hebrew, it's called Sarfat. France is the sign that in the time of the first Rebbe of Chabad, France was the ultimate anti-God country, the ultimate level in atheism. And to a certain degree it exists today, but nothing like it was before. France was successful. France was a country that succeeded in every way. It led the world in culture and in progress and in science and in philosophy and in literature. France was like the ideal human beings were the French. The French, they had, the music and arts and everything. France was the free country. Everything was free, right? You could do whatever you wanted to, especially, sexual things and pleasures and everything goes. France was the ideal, friendly. Everybody's happy. They're all laughing. There's parties and there's this the music. France, that was the ideal thing. And like I say, all of the other Jewish leaders, great Jewish leaders in the time, we're talking about 250 years ago, they were all in favor of France. They were enamored of France. They loved France. France gave freedom. Do what you want. How do you say? Shali, shali, shalach, shalach. Do what you want. I'll do what I want. Right? Just leave me alone. The religious people loved it. The religious Jews. You're letting me do what I want. I will even support you. I'll have a fund for any people who do what they want. You can get for the fund. If you assure me you're doing what you want, that's our religion. Everybody does what you want. Right? You want to believe in God, Jew, anything you want, you can do. You don't bother me, I won't bother you. Right? Yeah, you help me, I'll help you. To a certain degree, that's what Israel is. That's what the Medina of Israel, right? The religious people, you just leave me alone. Right? I want to be religious. I want to keep to myself. Just don't bother me. Don't bother me, right? Don't bother my synagogues. Don't bother my places of learning. Support me. Give me money. I'll support anything you want. You want to have a parade of whatever is a decadent parade? I'll keep quiet. I won't say anything. Right? You want to bring missionaries into the land of Israel? Listen, you do what you want. You want to say anybody can be a Jew. You want to the reform conversion, whatever you want, right? All the rabbis were for Napoleon. That was Napoleon. The only one that really opposed Napoleon was the first Rebbe of Chabad. And he said Napoleon and the whole religion and the whole what is called culture and philosophy that he represents is going to destroy Judaism. And sure enough, in France, that was the first place where there was like officially, accepted intermarriage. Oh, I'm part of the French people. This is the biggest accomplishment you could possibly get. We're so proud. Our daughter got married to, Pierre, whatever. You got now we're part of the Levon family or whatever it is. Right? The greatest. But all of a sudden, in the time of the Rebbe, and this existed, and all the Rebbes of Chabad made war against France in their own way. The first Rebbe of Chabad, like I said, he actually sent spies to spy on Napoleon and tell the Tsar where Napoleon's caches of ammunition and things were found. Okay, so says the Rebbe Bazeh, we see a novelty, especially in our generation, in regarding France. And this is for France. Yeah. France, and especially through the power of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, I want to stress over and over again, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, our Rebbe, right? Here's a picture of the Rebbe, right? He over and over said again, only in the end that he sort of changed it, but in the end he said, I am just an extension of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. I am just carrying out. There was nobody, none of the Rebbes were devoted to the Rebbe that was before them, like the Rebbe was devoted to the previous Rebbe. And he said the previous Rebbe is still alive. The previous Rebbe is still in 770. The previous Rebbe, he's the Moshiach. There's no doubt about it. The Rebbe said it hundreds of times. The previous Rebbe, he is the Moshiach of our generation, is the Moshiach. And the Rebbe said about himself that he's just an extension. He's just a continuation of the previous Rebbe's life. He's like the last stage of the previous Rebbe's life, right? The last stage of the previous Rebbe's life, he said, started when he took over, when the Rebbe took over. One time he said it was the two stages of the previous Rebbe's life was when he took over, and then when the previous Rebbe's daughter, the Rebbe's wife, died. Anyway, so now we can see this is the work of the previous Rebbe. Bli abed, without looking at the fact that France was the Tok of Klippa, was the worst opposition to God. And it was the opposite of the conduct of those who feared God, and especially in the ways of Hasidut. It was opposite. Because of this, therefore, the first Rebbe of Chabad opposed so powerfully the victory of Napoleon. As we said before, I don't know if we skipped this. Did we skip this yesterday? Yeah, we did. We skipped it. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Okay, here the Rebbe wants to say, and maybe we should do this also. The Rebbe says that before the defeat of Napoleon, Napoleon was the ultimate power in the world. Everyone was afraid of Napoleon. Everyone was afraid of Napoleon. And Napoleon offered, he was a genius, he offered the equality to all of this. And everyone was for, but nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe, he said, I'd rather that Russia would win and that Tzarfat would lose. And we're going back, we skipped this. In the language of the Alter Rebbe, he said, if Bonaparte, he said, if Napoleon wins, Yarbe Osher Yisrael, the Jewish people will become rich, Yoran Kerem Yisrael, and it will raise the glory of the Jewish people. Of Yitpardu Yitrachku Liban Shal Yisrael Mi'avim Shebeshamayim. But the Jews will leave God, which isn't what Napoleon wanted. And if Alexander, the king, Alexander, that was the king, the Tsar, there will be more poverty in the Jewish people, and the Jewish people will, the glory of the Jewish people will fall, but the Jewish people will be attached to their Father in heaven. In short, there won't be intermarriage. And because France was, like we said, freedom. That was the whole idea of freedom, like we said before, that if you know the history that France, in those days that Napoleon took over, it was the revolution in French Revolution. It was an ideological revolution, and it brought an ideological change in the whole entire world. This was one of the main events in history that the modern world and culture took over until this very day. Before the French Revolution, everything was in the hands of the king and the queen, and they could do whatever they wanted to. The transformation made that everyone became like a king, and everyone could do what they wanted to. Therefore, they overthrew the king, that the king would be able to, the king would be non-existent, no king, and the government would be in the hands of elected officials. Now, even though that there's a very good thing about this, that there was added freedom, and it brought a level of also richness to the Jewish people. Jewish people could go into business whatever they wanted to. But because this was not based on faith in God, so it came a whole idea of freedom spiritually also. freedom from God. What's called prikat ol, licentiousness. This eventually became rooted in all these other countries, and that came afterwards. That's why the Alter Rebbe was so against France, to the degree that because of this, that the first Rebbe, he didn't want to be under the France. Therefore, he ran away, he and his whole family, from his place in Liadi. and when he was running away, I mean, he could have just stayed there and accepted Napoleon like everybody else. He didn't have to run away. And because of this, and Napoleon was winning, like I say, Napoleon, he really defeated Russia, but it just was at a tremendous cost. So it caused, because the Alter Rebbe ran away from Napoleon, this was one of the reasons that the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe, he passed away. He passed away in the middle of his flight from Napoleon. And he promised the second Rebbe that Russia will win the war. And so it was, that even though Russia lost, but all of a sudden the winter came in and Napoleon had to go back take his troops back for whatever it is, replacement, of refreshment, whatever. And when they were going back, like we said yesterday, there were all these guerrilla troops, the Russians, and they decimated his whole army. But because Napoleon was defeated, so therefore it was possible to Jews to come closer to God again by means of Torah and Hasidut and etc. Okay, so now it gets back to that's where we were before. Therefore, we can say that now, because we saw that and the France was the big power that was against God, and it did it in such a clever way by freeing people from any bounds of conscience and making the main thing pleasure. So when France was defeated, so everything went from one side to the other. Asher lozu bilavad. Not only that, sha'ora kedusha, that the light of holiness has reached France, but Jews that have learned Torah, revealed Torah, hidden Torah, Kabbalah, Hasidut, they do commandments. They're there for an amount of time, and especially there are Jews that were sent there by the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and they encourage the learning of Torah and doing the commandments, and by writing novel ideas in the Torah, that also other Jews are able to learn from them. And by means of this, they could be published afterwards, and etc. in France. All right, so true, in the time of Rashi and those people, there was Torah that was there. There was Torah, but in the time of Napoleon, etc., people simply didn't want to learn Torah. They didn't want to. There was no desire. There was this new spirit, fresh spirit of freedom going through the world, emancipation going in the world. And it really caught on by the Jews. Instead of worshiping idols or whatever, they worship themselves. And especially after the Second World War, there came, with Hashkacha Pratis, a lot of Jews from a lot of different countries. There was a lot of Chabad also that ran away from Russia and from other countries, and they ran to Medina Zut, to this country, Nasa Makom Umirkas Shel Torah Yadut, that France became a center of Judaism. That Judaism became spread, and even Hasidut became spread out in France. By means of this, by means of this, they made many institutions of Torah and prayer. Lubavitch, and also Achitamimim, the other Imkam of Akama Snifim, and also other institutions of education. In addition to this, they also printed books of Nigla and etc., and everything was in a way of of addition, constantly raising and raising up. So if so, we see this. And I remember when I was by the Rebbe, this was like, I don't remember what year it was. The Rebbe will say what year it was, but I remember the year that the Rebbe talked about it before, that they started singing the French national anthem to the song of Aderet V'Amun. Aderet V'Amun is a prayer that we say on Shabbat, especially on Shabbat. Right before Baruch Shamar, Aderet V'Amun, Al-Chai Yolamim, Apina V'Abrach, Al-Chai Yolamim, Agdul B'Gvur, they said it, and then certainly thereafter, France actually changed a little bit. They changed like one part of the French national anthem. So he says that, so this, what happened is that France changed, that it allowed Judaism to flourish, and the Jews wanted to flourish, and that more and more Jews, anyway, this was the year, that's what I was trying to say. The Rebbe said that now France has been defeated, and because we saw in this, and the next year, I remember all of a sudden they started coming to the Rebbe. These French Jews came, that they were like really super street people. And the guys that came, they didn't know, the girls that came, they didn't know, how to dress modestly. They went into the Yechidus with the Rebbe, they didn't know how to prepare. They put on lipstick with perfume, and they just knew it. And it was quite amazing. And all of a sudden it was just filled, the place was just filled with French Jews. Now there's hundreds, thousands. In order to Shahari Shlemus Abiru is when the place, even the customs of the place change. You use the customs of the place in order to serve God. How much more so, that's what the Rebbes did by spreading out Judaism. Then in the course of the generations, it became more and more until our generation. This France became really refined, that without withstanding, that France was the lowest place in the world spiritually, and the customs of the place were totally opposite to fear of God, right? How people dressed, how they had. Because of this, the Alter Rebbe was so against, the first Rebbe was against, but now there's our generation, Jews are settled there, and even more, they've refined and they elevated to the opposite. They used the customs of the place in order to add Judaism and Hasidut. We can say that from this comes from the fact that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe had a custom that in the Makom Kavua Shel Rabbeinu Nesienu, that in the set place of all of the Rebbes of Chabad until the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, they lived in Russia, right? All of them, the first Rebbe of Chabad, all of them, they all lived in Russia. And even when they did temporarily leave Russia, who began this, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, the Rebbe Marash, he made trips, but they all came back. And by our Rebbe, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak, there was added a new thing in regarding to all of the, no. 1 minute. That he actually left Russia. The first 10 years of his leadership was in Russia, and then he left Russia and he went to other countries in a permanent way. Actually, there was 3 different periods of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Each one was 10 years. First of all, from 1820 until 1828, he was in Russia. The second was from 28 until 1940. 1940, he lived in Poland. Then that's when the war started. In 1940, 1939, 1940, he went to the land, he went to America, moved to America. In the middle, he moved around a little bit also, but according to what we said before, that every place you have to make use of the customs of the place in order to serve God. So there were slight changes in every place and how we spread out Judaism in different places. But we can say that because the previous Rebbe himself went to these different places, Russia, and then he finally made it to the land of Israel, which he made it, to the land, to America. He went to Israel also, but to America. So America is what's called the other side of the world. So this gave power that he could refine all the places in the world, even the lowest place, even France. And this is the novelty of our generation, which we're going to have to do this tomorrow. This is the novelty of our generation. And the generation, our generation, even more than the first generation of Chabad with the first Rebbe of Chabad, like we see clearly. After all the refinement, after all the work that we've spread out Judaism and we've spread out the teachings of Hasidut, which that's what the Moshiach said to the Baal Shem Tov, that you have to spread out your teachings to the ends of the world, Chutza, and also to the ends of the spiritual world, even to France. This brought about a refinement in the whole entire world, mainly more that it brought the redemption of the whole Jewish people and of the world. Then the world will be totally, transparent. This is how, especially in our generation. In our generation, the Rebbe gave a special power that we could even refine France, the lowest of the low. Just do one more and that's all for today. Even more, this idea of refining France was by the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, Rebbe Shmuel, that he traveled several times. He went to France, and he even made over there Bali Tshuva. And I'll tell you the story. I think you know the story, but I'll tell it to you anyway. And not only that he also said words of Hasidut and afterwards, and even more, the Rebbe Rashab, the son of the Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Shalom Dovber, he went to France many, many times. Until this place in Menton, there was even the building said that he got the idea of this whole series of Maimorim, which is called Tov Reish Ayin Beit. And there he wrote a little bit of this Maimor. So this was the whole idea of settling in France. And we're going to talk about it more in one moment. But let me just tell you the story in a short way. We'll also do the Yom Yom. That the Rebbe now, for some reason, you're right. You have a good question. Germany was really the center of Haskalah. This was the place where really they're the Berliners and this, but it began in France. This whole free thinking, way of free thinking, really began in France. 1 second. And even more, you could say that Russia was the big problem. I mean, Russia, the communism, did tremendous damage to Judaism. And there was 70 years, there was no, it was forbidden to learn Judaism. There's so many Jews. The Rebbe said that there could be more Jews in Russia than in the whole world put together. But the thing is that they just don't know that they're Jews. And he said, not only that they don't know, their mother didn't know she was Jewish, and even the grandmother didn't know she was Jewish. So in that way, Russia was in a way worse than Germany was. Of course, Germany, did terrible damage, spiritually. The Jews before World War II, they loved Germany. They loved Germany. They identified with Germany. The reform movement was born in Germany, right? They wanted to be like, Jewish Protestants or whatever it was. It was born in Germany. What's the question? Right? But nevertheless, that whole movement toward freedom from God and the worship of egotism began in France, began big time in France. And that was really the center. And like I said, the first place where there was like actively intermarriage was in France. So I'll just tell you the story very, very briefly. The Rebbe Marash once, the Rebbe Shmuel, he went with a couple of his son, I think, and a couple other Hasidim, and not explainable. And he went in a carriage, and he went to France, and he went to this fancy hotel, and he said he wanted the most expensive room in the place, and he didn't get the most expensive room. They gave him the second most expensive room, and he got settled in the room, and then he went to the casino, where everybody was drinking and gambling. And he walked up to a young man, and he said, young man, you're drinking wine. You should know that the wine of the Gentiles stuffs up the Jewish heart. And he sat back down. And then he went over to this young man again, and he said, young man, be a Jew. And he left and went to his room. This young man was very shaken by this. And he started asking around, who was that man? Who came to me? That he came to me. And usually the bellboys, they wouldn't know who it was, but they knew he took such an expensive room. So he said, he's in this room. Anyway, he went to his room. There were things that happened in the middle. It's not important. He went to the room, and this man, and he came out a different person, and he eventually became what's called a Baal Tshuva. He became a religious Jew. And it says that the name of the family was Klein. I don't know if it's the same Klein. The Rebbe had a secretary who's also called Klein. But anyway, they became a Klein, and they became well known. So the Rebbe somehow or other felt that this person was ready to be pulled from the quagmire of French culture, and he did. The Tzemach Tzedek writes, this is a life for you, there's a love for God, which is called Imcha Lo Chafatzti, that I don't want to just be with you, God. I want to be included in you. One should desire nothing other than God, not even heaven or anything on the earth, not even the higher heavens, the lower heavens. All these were created with like one letter of God's name. Love, ideally, is supposed to be directed to the essence of God himself. Because in fact, there doesn't exist anything except for this. This was actually expressed by my teacher, the first Rebbe, when he was clinging, when he was praying. You would hear him saying sometimes, I want nothing at all. I don't want heaven. I don't want your rule to come. All I want is you alone. Good Yom Tov, may everyone be inscribed and sealed for a good year in the study of Chassidut and the ways of Chassidus. Tonight is going to be Yutet Kislev. And Yutet Kislev is the day that the first Rebbe of Chabad was freed from prison, and the day that Chassidut Chabad was freed to be advertised in the whole entire world. And this is what's going to bring Moshiach. And as the Rebbe said, we see that even France has transformed. See you all, God willing, at 3:00 today with the Chumash class. Have a good day with Moshiach now. Yechi Adonenu, Morenu Rabbeinu Melech Moshiach L'Olam Moed.